looking at here, I love this meme. All right. And anybody, let me know in the comments. Have any of you guys become increasingly frustrated with CAPTCHA recently with these stupid things like trying to prove you're not a robot is getting harder and harder? And like, do you click on that top little corner there?
Absolutely.
Is there technically traffic light in that square?
Yes, it is.
Oh, it never works.
Or is
It's
it?
so frustrating.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, we have one guy to thank for that. This guy, Max Levchin. All right. He's the inventor of CAPTCHA. All right. He's also one of the early founders of PayPal. He's the one who gave us that stupid pick all the school buses and traffic lights thing. And he's also at the forefront of the buy now, pay later scheme. He is the CEO and founder of Affirm, which is one of the biggest buy now, pay later companies that's out there. And I think buy now, pay later is just a whole new iteration of subprime. And I think it's one of these things that has economists scratching their heads right now saying, how has consumer and retail spending been so strong when we have all these indicators, higher interest rates, stagnant wages, that say it shouldn't be? And I think this guy is the reason why. And I'm picking on Max a little bit here because he's the figurehead for buy now, pay later. But there's other companies, right? Apple is doing buy now, pay later. Klarna, Afterpay, right? There's other players here, Block. But he's the big player here over at Affirm. So let's talk a little bit about some of the data that we've gotten just in the last week here. A few stories, right? We've got GDP shows U.S. economy grew at 1.3% in the first quarter as consumer spending slowed. We had a new GDP was the second GDP estimate for the first quarter came out this week, and they dropped economic growth from 1.6% down to 1.3%. All right, there's your slowing economic growth that we just talked about in the stagflation question in the last segment here. All right, and this reduction in GDP, which was a pretty significant reduction, you know, when they lower between first and second estimates by 0.3%, that was a pretty big surprise. And they're saying here in this article, it was almost exclusively driven by slowing growth in consumer spending. The revised report showed that consumer spending, the main driver of the economy, grew at a 2% pace instead of a 2.5% pace, as previously indicated. Household spending had risen at a rate of more than 3% in the prior 2 quarters. So we're seeing a deceleration in consumer spending. It's just starting, and it's already starting to hit GDP estimates in a pretty big way here. And we got some more data in the last couple of weeks like this one, also in Market Watch on May 15th. Retail sales were flat in April, falling below economists' expectations. All right, they're saying here the retail sales were unchanged in April, the Commerce Department said, as sales at gas stations offset weaknesses in cars and several other categories. So really, higher gas prices were kind of hiding that we actually had a slowdown in retail sales in April. You know, they're saying people spent more money at gas stations because gas prices went up. So the consumer is slowing here. He's starting to slow down. We also see it in this chart here. This is consumer credit card debt. All right, America's credit card bill. And this chart, it just makes me sick. I cringe every time I look at this. Look at what we've done since 2021 with all the stimmies, and look at how we just ran up the credit cards. As soon as the stimmies stopped flowing, we just started putting everything on plastic. And we also invented this buy now, pay later phenomenon while we were doing that. But you'll notice what happened at the end of March. At the end of March, the credit card bill stopped going up. The banks are starting to tighten their lending restrictions on credit cards. Credit cards are maxed out. People aren't getting new increases in their credit card limits, and delinquencies are starting to rise. And really, since the end of March, early April, this has actually been trending down. So the people aren't putting as much on the credit card anymore. And you can kind of see here, while all this is going on, delinquencies are starting to rise here. This most recent data point is the first quarter. Look at credit card delinquencies in blue. They are rising big time, almost as fast as they did in the lead up to the GFC. We've also got auto loan delinquencies are rising quickly. Mortgages defaults are taking their time. They're rising, but very slowly. And of course, this red line, the student loan debt, that's fake because the government made it illegal to report delinquencies on student loans. So that number would actually be like through the floor, through the ceiling of my house, and a threat to aviation for any planes flying over my house if they were going to tell the truth about that. So the point is delinquencies are rising. Delinquencies are rising in every category, faster in some, but they're on the rise. And then we got this a few months ago. This was back in February. All right. Our boy Max over at Affirm, they reported their quarters. And they said something interesting. They're talking about here, oh, if you're shopping at 2 a.m., that's a red flag for a buy now, pay later lender. They might not approve you if you're shopping at 2 a.m. He's trying to make it look like Affirm is this edgy new thing where they're analyzing your data and they're using that to gauge your credit risk. And he's claiming that they've been so successful, and there's no way to verify this because buy now, pay later debt is not reported to credit agencies. That's huge and so important. There is no transparency whatsoever with what they're doing with this debt. And what Max Levchin was saying, they're saying here last week, this was back in February, Affirm reported that 30-day delinquencies on monthly loans held steady from a year earlier at 2.4%, even as total purchase volume surged 32% during that time. All right, so Affirm is claiming some very impressively low delinquency ratings on this buy now, pay later debt. 2.4%. All right. And again, look at what credit card delinquency is doing. It's up over 70 now, and that's 90-day delinquencies. And they were saying that 30-day was only 2% and change. Suspicious to say the least. Now let's look a little bit closer. Who uses buy now, pay later? This is in the Wall Street Journal back in March. Younger Americans with more debt and lower credit scores. All right. Remember, Affirm is telling us that they've got a 2.4% 30-day delinquency rate, even though it's young Americans with more debt and low credit scores that are predominantly taking out this buy now, pay later debt. And this line in particular in this article really jumped out at me. BNPL users had riskier credit backgrounds than other borrowers. Buy now, pay later users had an average credit score between 580 and 669. Average. Half of them are lower than that. That is subprime, right? The average credit user has a subprime credit rating for buy now, pay laters. And they're saying this is considered subprime. Consumers with top-notch scores were less likely than those with deep subprime scores of below 580 to borrow from BNPL. So what the Wall Street Journal here is saying is these are the riskiest borrowers in the world, or in America, we'll say, 580 to 660 on average that are buying buy now, pay later at a time when delinquencies in virtually every category are going up. And yet our boy Max here, Max Levchin, is claiming that they've only got a 2.4% 30-day delinquency rate. So that either this algorithm that analyzes your shopping patterns based on what data, I don't know, either that algorithm is amazing or they're just flat out lying here. So this information doesn't really add up. And we've had some data points in recent months that suggests my suspicions might be correct. In this article in Bloomberg, they're saying what's buy now, pay later, how it works, and the hidden risks. But I'm zeroing in on some of these clues. All right, you read enough news, you remember these little snippets, and you start to recognize patterns here. And here we go in this article, way down here. In a recent survey in the U.S., it was conducted by Bloomberg News for Harris Poll. It found that 43% of those who owe money to buy now, pay later services said they were behind on payments, while 28% said they were delinquent on some other debt because of spending on buy now, pay later platforms. So Mr. CAPTCHA over there, Mr. Traffic Lights, and where's the crosswalks and how many bicycles are in this image? He says 2.4%. Harris Poll says we asked the people with the subprime credit scores, and 43% of them said they were missing payments. Somebody's lying here. And there's more data here. We got this one in CNBC. Americans are going into debt to buy groceries. People are putting food on buy now, pay later. Here's why those balances can be difficult to pay down. And again, it's not the title here that I'm worried about. It's these snippets that I find hiding in these articles. Scrolling way down here. Of those who use buy now, pay later for groceries, 37% of adults missed payments on those loans. All right. Now, this was done by the Urban Institute, this study. So, look, guys, we've got two studies. The one that was done by Harris for Bloomberg said 43% were missing payments. This study by the Urban Institute says 37% were missing payments. But CEO Alex says 2.4% at a time when delinquencies are on the rise in every category. And look, It's up to you guys. Do you believe Mr. Maximilian here, Mr. Max Levchin? Do you think Mr. Traffic Lights is telling the truth about that 2.4% 30-day delinquency rate on buy now, pay later loans to people with subprime credit scores? These are unsecured loans. There's no collateral to seize if they don't pay. These are people younger Americans who are already in debt, who aren't paying their student loans. Defies logic, these delinquency rates that they're claiming, which means, of course, in my opinion, that there is a wave of defaults coming in this space. So who suffers when buy now, pay later doesn't pay later, when it turns into like take now and never pay? Who ends up suffering? Well, it's funny. I found this article here just a few days ago. Morningstar DBRS confirms credit rating on Affirm Asset Securitization Trust 2024 Alpha. That's a mouthful. What you're looking at here is Affirm, that company, taking this buy now, pay later debt, $1 billion of it, and they're packaging it up into an asset-backed security, a bond, and they're selling it to investors. And oh, by the way, look at this. $790.4 million of this bond is being rated AAA by Morningstar. More than three quarters, almost 80% of debt held by people with an average credit score of 580 to 660 is being rated 80% AAA. It's being sold into asset securitization trusts. And who's buying this? Once again, folks, it is almost always income ETFs, target date retirement funds. In other words, it's pension funds and retirements that are buying this garbage debt. It's the middle class retirement that's going to end up footing the bill for this. Our pensions and retirements is the parking lot for Wall Street's toxic waste every single time. And I would just add, guys, that it's gotten so bad that we had this one back in March, also in New York Post. 15 million Americans, including those making $100,000 or more, are buying groceries with buy now, pay later. And if you assume an average household of four, you're talking 60 million people are using this to eat. That is how bad things have gotten in the consumer world. And once again, this guy says, don't worry, only 2.4% of the people are delinquent, even though we've got two studies here who are saying high double-digit percentages. That's what I got for you guys.
So, Jack, in kind of, I want to go read all these articles again with a microscope, because as you were talking, I kind of had some ideas about what they could be doing. Like, for instance, he could be, doing things like saying he's only talking about the loans in the securitizations, which at that point, a lot of times what they do is they buy those bad loans out of those securitizations and replace them. The other thing is, what's their charge-off policy? Meaning, like, when do they charge? The banks typically charge off things around 90 days, and that those numbers no longer then show up in a lot of their kind of delinquency metrics. So, that's where there's all kinds of shell games going on. But when you were reading, did you have any were there any clues about how they might be hiding this delinquency?
Here's the thing. They don't even need to hide it, Melody. This is what's so hilarious about that. And the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency are starting to sniff out this problem, and they're starting to get in on it. Again, they're going to wait until after the election, probably. Wouldn't want anything to happen to consumer spending heading into the election. But they don't have to report this data. This is the Wild West of garbage debt. And since none of this stuff is reported to the credit bureaus, we really have no access to this data, no way to verify what they're doing, no way to scrutinize these policies, right? There is no transparency whatsoever. And I would add, because of that lack of transparency, the borrower is even more incentivized to not pay it back because it won't show on his credit report. If they don't pay this bill, it doesn't hurt their credit. So it's another data point that makes me say there's no way delinquencies are really 2.4% on these debt. It's probably, if we view it with a consistent metrics that we use for measuring delinquencies elsewhere, I think we're going to find it is astronomically higher than even the credit card delinquencies, which are rising very quickly right now.
One follow-up, Travis, if I could, before yours. So very interestingly, Jack, this past week, I got my hands on a census household pulse survey. In our last segment, I did a whole show on why I thought mortgage delinquency was not, we don't understand the true nature of it. And I talked about Black Knight, who said they had 80% of servicing, and they're showing 1.4 million people as non-current. But this census survey showed over 6 million people when they were essentially being at least 30 days delinquent on mortgages. So that'll probably be a topic we talk about next week. But, when people were asked versus going to these data providers, the delinquency was much higher.
And the data providers are incentivized to put as much lipstick on that pig as possible, right? I mean, that's
absolutely.
Yep. Same thing with the firm.
Yep.
Jack, I hate this, man. I hate it. And honestly, they are required to report the information to the credit bureaus. It's called the Fair Credit Reporting Act. The problem is the FTC isn't enforcing.
Right.
If the FTC would enforce the requirement that they have to report accurate information to the credit bureaus, it would be different. But I've read many articles where the credit bureaus like Experian, TransUnion, Equifax are like, come on, we're ready. Just report us the data. But the CEOs of these buy now, pay later companies are saying, no, we don't want to give you that information because we don't want to hurt our clients because they're in default. And here's the thing that really, it's just the same old crap just over and over again. What I am just gathering from all this is just more awareness on what's going on behind the scenes, because part of consumer spending is debt. Correct, Jack?
Oh, sure. I mean, I would argue the largest chunk of consumer spending is debt. And so what we have going on right now, from what I can see, is a situation to where things aren't sustainable. Most people are already out of money. We see that on the reports of the excess savings and the ability to savings as far as the U.S. Personal household savings rate. So the savings is gone. Now the savings has been replaced. That spending has been replaced from savings now to debt. What's very interesting, Jack, is now even that has stopped. We see that in the credit card balances being flatlined. And so that's the point I've been trying to make, is it's not sustainable. It makes sense, like, okay, we're on phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, but it all comes to the same crashing end. The reason this is different this time, one of the many reasons, is the deficit spending, which I would call inflation, is the inflation this time. And it's absolutely killing people. But I want people to understand that we got to get to the end point. We got to cross the finish line. And that finish line it's a messy finish line. And we see that in a historical context. You run out of savings, you charge debt, you stop paying your debt, things fall apart. And right now we're on, in my opinion, we're on phase 3. People are stopping paying their debt. We see it in the credit cards, and we don't see it in buy now, pay later. Because again, I go back to what I said original broadcast here, is the greed, corruption, and fraud continues to find loopholes. The lack of enforcement from consumer protection bureaus, CFPB, FTC, it's a real issue here. And so, I just go back to telling people hey, you don't have to be part of it. just to the best of your ability, literally listen to what I'm saying. Stop recklessly, spending if you can. And buy now, pay later is a huge problem because unlike credit cards report to the bureau so we can fully understand someone's purchasing power and credit worthiness. Buy now, pay later is just a loophole, and it's about to be exposed. And just like the new home building scam, and I'll get into that, I think these people are going to be pulled into Congress. I hope they will, and I hope they will be held accountable for the law violations. I mean, do you agree with that, Melly? They are required by the Fair Credit Reporting Act to report this, and FTC, Federal Trade Commission, is supposed to be enforcing it?
Yeah, I don't. So Travis, I know that they've been able to get away with not doing it. I don't know exactly why. So I wouldn't be the person to ask that.
I tell you guys, Congress can't agree on what time it is. So Congress is not going to change the legislation. The only way this behavior will change is if the FTC or one of these regulatory agencies issues some kind of new interpretation of the law
guidance.
that says, based on
Right.
our review of a law that was passed before buy now, pay later existed, buy now, pay later is subject to this regulation. They haven't done that yet. They've been warning that they're going to do that, but they haven't. And of course, the party in power doesn't want to do anything to disrupt consumer spending now. And I would add, it's again, the lack of transparency. We have no idea how big this thing is because they don't have to report it. For all we know, this is hundreds of billions of dollars. We just don't know. And we know 15 million Americans are using this stuff just to eat, let alone Gucci bags and sweaters and everything else. So this is a huge thing, and there is no metrics. It's a big variable in this equation, and we can't even see it.
What was that dollar amount on that securitization, Jack, that you showed?
It was
Again?
1 billion with the ability to raise it to 1.5.
All right. So what I would say, anybody that has time, and I'll be doing it soon, but we should, usually you can get into those securitization deal docs, at least the original securitization, and kind of see what's under the hood there. I think that's definitely something I want to do. But $1 billion, guys, that means this is way bigger than most people think. That is a massive securitization.
And again, the average borrower in that population has a subprime credit score, and they rated it 79% AAA.
They're trying to squeeze the remaining juice out of the orange. I mean,
how are they scrutinizing that data? How are they arriving at that 79% AAA rating? Based on proprietary algorithms that they won't share with us. They're hiding behind privacy. They're hiding behind intellectual property to prevent reporting this data accurately.
Right. And it's like another scene from The Big Short where, they go in and talk to the blind lady at the rating agency.
Yeah.
And that is because,
it's sad though. It is sad though. I mean, look at who's paying for this. I mean, the teachers and the firefighters. Not the people that should be paying for it. The CEOs, the banks. I mean, our heroes are the ones that are
it and sell it to retirements. That's what they keep doing.
All right. Well, for the sake of time, guys, I got a couple questions. I start here. Oh, I see. There's a private chat. My bad. So first one is from Brian Cutsinger. Is higher for longer making buy now pay later an even larger bubble?
I think it probably is contributing because credit card rates are pushing like 30% in some examples. I mean, those are sharecropper rates. That should be almost illegal in my opinion. And so, when you're faced with 30% debt, that does show up on your credit report. And then you could just be like, yeah, I'll click buy now, pay later with no intention of ever paying it back. And they're never going to report it to the credit bureau and they're not going to come repossess my groceries. Sure. So I think higher for longer is probably playing a role here. And I also think that this is playing a role in skewing GDP higher because this garbage debt is new money being lent into existence that is juicing economic growth in the form of more consumer spending. So it's hiding the pain of higher for longer. It's masking it.
Melody?
Oh, no, I would agree with everything Jay just said. I know.
I mean, I'll come out the gate. I'll say 100%. I mean, it's called quantitative tightening. The more that we are in this period of quantitative tightening, the more people will suffer through unaffordability and the more they will have to rely on these scams like buy now, pay later to continue their spending. And that's why I'm shouting like, viewers, please, guys, like, don't be like those people. Don't be like those people. It's not too late. Don't lose hope, right? But be aware. Step one, be aware, right? Now, I got one more question. So sorry. Here we go. Here's a good one right here. I think it's really good because they're bringing up the student loan repayments, but GWAN debt bubble, ? When student loans need to be repaid again. Okay, so they're basically saying, first of all, people have to pay student loans right now as far as interest payments. So them not making their payments, it's only increasing their balances. But what is a fact is the late payments are not being reported on their credit reports. Again, a violation of law. Okay. Although they passed something in Congress making it not. But that happens October of this year. And that's why like 4 months away. So what are your thoughts there, guys, on that?
I believe it's October is when conveniently just before, or so it won't show up until just after the election, is when the reporting to the credit bureaus of student loan debt becomes a thing again. And while that's going on, a few billion here, a few billion here, a few billion here is being forgiven, even though Supreme Court Supreme Court said what about it? They're just ignoring the SCOTUS ruling on that. But I heard a very good point on Adam Taggart's channel, Thoughtful Money, recently by Stephanie Pomboy, fantastic analyst. She said, we've now got moral hazard on Main Street and Wall Street. And that should terrify you, right? Moral hazard is when you borrow money or you take somebody's money, you stand to gain from it, but you bear none of the risk, right? So in 2008, moral hazard ran rampant in Wall Street. The golden parachutes, Main Street had to bail them out. And so that was viewed as a moral hazard. And now what you've got is you've got this pattern of doom spending. You've got people taking out student loans with no intention of ever paying them back. You've got people taking this buy now, pay later. And I think a lot of them, probably in the millions, have no intention of ever paying it back. Running up credit cards, no intention of paying it back. Our entire financial system is based on credit. And it is becoming more and more mainstream to borrow money you have no intention of ever paying back. So that should terrify you, because when the people who borrow without any intention to repay outnumber the decent people who intend to keep their word, that's when this whole thing stops working and credit becomes worthless. And I don't know what that looks like, but the whole freaking system is credit based. So you better believe that's going to be a big problem.
Melody?
Well, it's just interesting because, one of my jobs in post 2006 was just monitoring credit quality, we would look at our entire book. We'd look at the weighted average credit score. We'd look at weighted average loan to value. And you would just see these things deteriorate each month, just getting worse and worse and worse. And what I saw for the first time this last month in my aggregate client books was a credit score decline of 2 points. That it had just been going up or staying the same due to all of this credit score inflation that we've talked about. But what will be very interesting is what happens almost overnight to credit scores when these balances start to be reported, and then their inability to get additional credit is going. That's going to be. They're going to be without options, especially if they were thinking they were going to refinance, or especially if they were thinking they were going to take out one of these Freddie second liens if that program goes forward. And so I think what we're going to see is overnight, just purchasing power just disappear.
Yeah. And honestly, purchasing power going away is similar to unemployment.
100%.
And we see that happening on a global level with Japan, Germany, and China, right? They have low unemployment and yet are on recession and have price decline with low unemployment. So the show stops. Any last words? Sorry for taking that. Any last words, Jack?
Yeah, 15 million people eaten off of buy now, pay later. We've got low unemployment. We supposedly have the best economy ever. Something is very, very wrong and broken here. And I just got to come back. The mainstream financial press is just bombarding you with empty platitudes about how everything is good and strong and resilient. 15 million people putting groceries on buy now, pay later. Something is very, very wrong out there.
All right, guys. So don't let that be you. And that's a wrap.